The hour of night when silence reigns, yet unseen battles stir, is a threshold where the soul is most vulnerable, and unseen voices seek entry. It is a curious thing about the night, that when the world has gone to its rest, when men have laid aside their labors, and even the houses seem to breathe in slower rhythm, there awakens another sort of movement. Not the march of footsteps on the street, not the engines of traffic or the shouts of the marketplace, but movements that belong to another order entirely. The stillness of 2 o'clock in the morning has a peculiar weight about it, as though all the curtains of day had been drawn aside, leaving the soul bare before forces it did not know had been circling all along. For many, it is an hour that comes only rarely, when one finds oneself awake and restless, watching the ceiling or pacing the floor, yet for others it is an hour familiar and unwelcome, carrying with it not peace but a sharp edge of dread. Why is it that this time bears such a weight, heavier than 11 at night or even midnight itself? Perhaps it is because the mind, deprived of the protection of daylight and the noise of company, turns inward with a searching intensity, and the shadows it finds there are not easily dismissed. Perhaps it is because the weariness of the body and the slowness of thought make a person pliable, more ready to believe the whispers that come with the dark. At 2 in the morning, the guard of the heart is often down, the defenses lowered, and so the soul is as an unlatched door in a silent street, waiting for anyone, or anything, that should push against it. And in that lowering, in that unguarded state, the very battles we thought belonged to other realms press close and make themselves known. For make no mistake, there are battles that are not fought with sword or gun, not fought with wealth or power, but fought in the unseen places where thoughts are born and desires are kindled. These are not the battles of armies but of souls, and 2 in the morning is a field well chosen for such wars. A man or woman lying restless in bed may find thoughts rising unbidden, heavy as lead or sharp as flame, thoughts they would laugh at or dismiss in the brightness of noon, but which at that hour seem commanding, persuasive, irresistible. Doubts swell like storms, fears take on voices, memories sharpen with accusing edge, temptations whisper with alluring sweetness, and loneliness presses in with crushing force. It is as if the veil between the visible and the invisible has thinned, and the soul finds itself suddenly in the middle of a conflict it had not prepared for. And why unprepared? Because so few of us take seriously the truth that such a thing is even possible. We imagine the dangers of the night as belonging only to the streets, to the dark alleys where crime festers, to the wild reveries of those who give themselves to ruin, but not to the silent bedroom, not to the quiet home. Yet there is a danger that creeps silently, without lock or key, without the sound of breaking glass or forced entry. And it is at its strongest when the hour is deepest and the world least alert. At 2 in the morning, when the watchman nods and the lamps burn low, the prowlers of the unseen do their best work, for the heart is lulled and the mind dulled, and the soul feels itself adrift upon a sea of shadows. Consider how many great failings, confessions, or collapses trace their route to the quiet hours when no one was watching. The student poring over books in the midnight hour suddenly faces a wave of despair so strong it convinces him he will never rise again. The woman grieving alone in her room finds the silence echoing her sorrow until it grows unbearable, and she begins to listen for any voice at all, even those not meant for her. The restless heart of the wanderer, pacing his floor, begins to feel the pull of desires he would not feed by daylight, but which now whisper sweetly because there are no witnesses but the night. What begins as a small stirring in the heart grows louder in the silence, until it drowns out every other sound. And in such moments, the battle is not small, for what seems a private thought may in truth be an invasion, and what seems a mere restlessness may be the first blow of a war. It is not accidental that in every ancient culture and in every sacred writing, the night hours are described as watch hours, as times not merely to sleep but to guard. The shepherds of old did not slumber through the night, without keeping one eye on their flock, for they knew the predators that lurked, just beyond the firelight. The city gates were not left unmanned until morning, but soldiers were set in shifts to stand their ground, lest the enemy seize the moment of least defense. So too it is with the soul. If we do not know that 2 in the morning is a watch hour, if we treat it as nothing but the empty middle of the night, then we leave ourselves as prey for any whispering force that should pass by. And yet, it is not only danger that makes this hour weighty, but also possibility. For just as the prowlers of darkness make use of it, so too does the voice of the eternal sometimes call in that very stillness. Many have found that their most piercing convictions, their most profound awakenings, come not when the sun blazes high, but when the night is deep, when all distractions have fled and the heart is laid bare. The same silence that makes us vulnerable also makes us able to hear what we otherwise miss. And so 2 in the morning is not merely an hour of peril, but an hour of choice. It is a threshold, a crossroads, where the soul may be drawn down into despair or up into light, depending on which voice it heeds. That is why it is dangerous. Not because the hour itself carries poison, but because it exposes the soul in its rawest form. In the business of day, a man can disguise his fears with his work, his temptations with his laughter, his doubts with the clamor of others. But at 2 in the morning, stripped of all disguise, he is left with himself, and whatever voices hover near. If the soul is unanchored, it will be tossed about as a ship on stormy waters. If the heart is unguarded, it will be pried open by any hand that seeks to enter. This is why the call comes as an alert, a warning spoken not in condemnation, but in mercy. Be awake, be watchful, know that this hour is not neutral ground. 2 in the morning is the place where masks fall away, where the thin lines we draw in daylight to separate what we want from what we fear are blurred and crossed. The soul that has been running from its own wounds finds them uncovered. The mind that has drowned itself in noise finds silence pressing upon it. The heart that has resisted listening to truth finds that truth whispering with undeniable clarity. And so what is dangerous is not only the intrusion of evil, but the exposure of the self. For many, that is the hardest thing of all. To see themselves as they are, without the comfort of distraction. In such a moment, honesty itself feels like peril, and yet it is the very thing that can bring deliverance, if only it is born. The night is not an enemy in itself, nor is 2 in the morning cursed by nature. But it is a reminder that the soul lives not only in the world of flesh and bone, but in the world of spirit, and that world is most visible when all else is hushed. To be warned about this hour is to be invited to prepare, to understand that such moments will come, and that when they do, the soul must not be found naked and afraid but armed and awake. Just as a soldier sharpens his blade before the battle, just as a watchman lights his lamp before the night, so the heart must ready itself for the silence where the unseen stirs. And the mercy of such a warning is that we are not left ignorant, not left to stumble blindly into the field of conflict, but told in advance that it is coming, that it is real, that it must be faced. For the threshold is not an ending but a beginning, not a punishment but an alert, a bell ringing in the deep night to call the sleeper to awareness. Those who heed it will find strength even in weakness, for they will understand that vigilance is not in vain, that the very hour which feels like ambush can become the hour of triumph, if faced with open eyes. Those who ignore it may find themselves entangled before they even know a struggle has begun, for what one does not believe in can still claim its toll. The battle does not wait for permission, and so the only safety is in heeding the call, in treating the night not as empty, but as alive with meaning. The heart, when wearied and unguarded, mistakes shadows for truth, and dangers that would not dare approach by day creep close in the cloak of 2 a.m. There is a peculiar exhaustion that clings to the human spirit in the late hours of the night, an exhaustion that is not merely of the body, but of the soul itself. When the day has demanded all of one's attention, one's energy, one's vigilance, and the weight of cares has pressed upon the mind until it longs only for rest, there comes a moment when the guard lowers almost of its own accord. Sleep does not always come quickly to claim the weary, and in that interval between labor and slumber the heart is most open to influences it would never grant audience to in the brightness of morning. What is resisted in strength at noon is entertained in weakness at night, and the shadows take advantage of the weariness to present themselves as substance, their whispers as wisdom, their illusions as truth. It is a well-known thing that darkness alters perception. A path familiar by day becomes menacing by night. The rustle of leaves becomes a threatening presence. The shape of a tree becomes a lurking figure. The same holds true within the soul. Doubts that are trivial by daylight loom immense at 2 a.m. Worries that are easily silenced in company roar in solitude. Questions that would be dismissed with laughter when friends are near gain a deadly gravity when the heart is alone in the silence. The shadows of thought, the half-formed fears, the slanting suggestions, all gather and magnify themselves until they seem like inescapable truths. The heart, too tired to test them, too numb to push them back, takes them in as though they were real. Thus illusion gains the strength of reality, and the soul trembles at spectres it has mistaken for fact. And consider this, there are many dangers that keep their distance when the sun is high, not because they cease to exist, but because they fear exposure. Temptations that slink away from the scrutiny of daylight return bold in the night. Lies that cannot stand against clear reason by morning's clarity become persuasive when reason is dulled by fatigue. Sorrows that seem endurable when distractions abound feel unbearable when the silence presses against the heart like a weight. At 2 a.m, when the world is quiet and the mind longs only to escape itself, these dangers creep near, emboldened by the cloak of darkness. They do not need to be strong. They need only to be persistent, whispering again and again into the ear of a weary soul until it ceases to resist and begins to believe. How many confessions are born of such hours? How many regrets are tied to decisions made in the haze of night? Words spoken to no one but the empty room, promises sworn in desperation, actions taken not from wisdom but from weariness. All these come not from the strength of conviction, but from the weakness of exhaustion. A mind clouded by fatigue is fertile soil for deception, and the adversaries of the soul know it well. They wait not for the time of clarity, but for the time of cloud, not for the hour of strength, but for the hour of weakness. And so the dangers that linger at a distance all day draw close when 2 o'clock arrives, and they find the heart more willing to believe shadows than truth, more willing to embrace despair than to wait for hope, more willing to yield to temptation than to resist for another hour. There is, in every life, a moment when the night presses so heavily upon the heart that it seems unbearable. It may be a grief freshly awakened. It may be a fear that refuses to be silenced. It may be a temptation that burns like fire. But whatever form it takes, it arrives clothed in darkness, magnified by the lateness of the hour. The heart cries out for comfort, and because it is weary, it takes whatever answer comes first. And so lies find ready ears, illusions find ready eyes, and the soul begins to build its reality out of shadows. By day, these structures collapse like mist, and the soul marvels that it ever believed them. But in the night, they were as firm as stone, and as consuming as flame. Do not suppose that the danger is small simply because it is invisible. The collapse of a man's integrity does not always come in broad daylight. Witnessed by the crowd, often it begins in the solitary hours of the night, when he convinced himself of something false, when he surrendered to a voice he should have resisted, when he let down his guard, because he thought no one was watching. The great falls of character are often preceded by quiet concessions made at 2 a.m. The outward ruin is only the harvest of seeds planted in secret, seeds that seemed harmless because they were sown in the darkness. Yet the soil of the weary heart is fertile, and once planted, such seeds take root with alarming speed. If there is danger, there is also responsibility. One cannot avoid weariness, for the body is frail and must rest, but one can choose how to keep watch even in weakness. Just as a traveler locks his door not because he is never tired, but because he knows thieves will come when he sleeps. So the soul must guard itself, not because it will never be wary, but precisely because it will. To know that the late hours are perilous is itself a form of defense. For then the heart will not treat its shadows as truth, but as illusions waiting to be unmasked. To know that dangers creep near at 2 in the morning is to rob them of half their power, for then the soul can whisper to itself, "This fear is a night. Fear, it will shrink with dawn." Or, "This temptation is a night voice. It will falter with light." Such knowledge is a lamp in the darkness, small but steady, and enough to keep the shadows from becoming masters. But the tragedy is that many hearts remain ignorant. They do not know the night distorts, they do not know weariness deceives, and so they give full weight to what is only a whisper, full honor to what is only a shadow. They carve their lives according to lies spoken at 2 in the morning, and they find themselves lost when the day returns. To be warned is to be armed, but to be unwarned is to be exposed, and so the alert is mercy. It is no cruel word to say, "Beware of 2 o'clock." It is a kind word, for it opens the eyes before the danger arrives. The dangers that creep close are not invincible. They are opportunists, feeding on weariness, thriving in ignorance. The same heart that mistakes shadows for truth at 2 o'clock can, with a little vigilance, expose them for what they are. The same dangers that creep near in the night flee at the sound of watchful prayer, at the light of truth remembered even when unseen, at the stubborn refusal to grant them the weight they demand. If the soul is willing to be awake even in its weariness, if it is willing to lift its eyes even when heavy, it will find that the shadows cannot endure scrutiny, that the illusions cannot withstand truth, and that the dangers, though they draw close, cannot break through the guarded heart. And so the alert is given not to terrify but to prepare. 2 in the morning is dangerous because the heart is wary and unguarded, because shadows masquerade as truth, because dangers that would never dare approach by day creep boldly under the cloak of night. But to know this is to strip the danger of its surprise. To hear the warning is to be awake when others slumber, to keep a lamp burning when the room is dark. And though the night may still press heavily, though the shadows may still gather, the soul that is warned will not be so easily deceived, for it knows that not every voice is truth, not every shadow is substance, not every fear is fate. To remain awake in spirit at such an hour is to be armed, for the summons of God at that time is not for fear but for vigilance, lest the darkness lay claim. The hour is heavy, the silence deep, and the shadows thick, but the soul that knows it is being summoned does not tremble as one abandoned. It stands as one warned and one chosen. 2 in the morning is not merely a danger to be feared, but a watch, post to be manned. It is not only the hour when threats draw close, but the hour when the eternal voice whispers, "Be watchful, for you are not alone." And the darkness does not hold dominion. For vigilance is not a punishment, it is a calling, a readiness, a strength clothed in wakefulness. And those who hear the summons at such an hour find that even weariness can become a form of offering, even solitude can become communion, even silence can be filled with presence. It is a curious truth that the soul kept awake in spirit at such an hour will see more clearly than one lulled by slumber, even if the eyes of the body are closed in sleep. For to be awake in spirit is not merely to avoid physical rest, but to remain alert to the unseen realities that press against the borders of human life. Many lie awake at 2 in the morning, and yet are not awake in spirit. They are restless, not vigilant, anxious, not discerning. Their thoughts turn in circles, their fears repeat endlessly, and they find no relief. But the one who answers the summons does not pace in futility, he watches as a sentinel, knowing that what others call empty night is in truth a battleground where his watch has meaning. The difference is not in the hour, but in the posture of the soul. One drifts in shadows unguarded, the other stands in shadows but with armor, and the presence of armor transforms the same hour from peril to purpose. To be summoned at such an hour is to be given a task, not to cower in fear of the dark, not to flee the weight of silence, but to guard against the subtle claim of the night. The darkness is not only the absence of light, it is an active force that seeks to encroach, to convince, to cover. It lays its hand upon the weary and whispers, "Give in." It lays its veil upon the doubtful and whispers, "There is no answer." It lays its cloak upon the tempted and whispers, "No one will see." But vigilance breaks that claim. Vigilance is the refusal to yield the soul to voices that are not truth. Vigilance is the standing watch when every natural inclination calls for surrender. Vigilance is the sharp edge of faith, held even when eyes cannot see and hands cannot grasp. And so, to be awake in spirit at 2 in the morning is to answer back to the darkness. You may surround, but you cannot rule. You may press in, but you will not claim. There are moments when the summons of God comes most clearly at the very hour when danger is most near. This is not cruelty but mercy, for the call itself is protection. To be stirred from restlessness into vigilance is to be given a shield. A child woken by his father before the storm breaks does not curse the waking, but blesses it when he sees the danger that would have overtaken him asleep. So too is the soul that finds itself stirred to wakefulness in the deep night. It may not understand at once why its slumber was broken, why its heart beats so heavily, why its mind cannot be stilled, but if it listens, it will hear the summons. Be alert. Stand guard. The night is not empty, and your watch is needed. And that alertness itself becomes its safety. The very act of remaining awake in spirit denies the darkness its claim. To misunderstand this summons is to fall into despair. Many think that if they are awake in the night, it must be a punishment, a sign of abandonment, as though the silence were evidence of absence. They mistake the call for loneliness, the summons for exile. But the truth is otherwise. The silence of 2 in the morning is not empty, it is full, waiting for the ear that will hear. The summons of God at that hour is not for fear but for vigilance, not to terrify but to steady. It is as though the eternal hand rests upon the shoulder of the weary and says, "You are not forsaken, you are needed. Stand your ground, for you are not alone." Such words, if believed, transform the hour entirely. What was once dread becomes discipline. What was once despair becomes duty. What was once emptiness becomes encounter. Consider the soldier upon the wall. He does not imagine that his midnight watch is meaningless. He knows the enemy prefers the cover of night, that the attack will come when torches are few and eyes are heavy. And so he does not despise the command to wakefulness. He embraces it, for he understands its purpose. The watch is wearying, but it is life-saving. To remain vigilant in the night is to preserve the safety of the morning. So it is with the soul at 2 in the morning. To remain awake in spirit is not a small act. It is the guarding of one's life, and often of more than one's own. For the battles fought in silence may determine not only the course of one heart, but of many, as ripples spread outward from a single center. We live in an age that despises vigilance. The world praises business by day and indulgence by night, but it has little patience for watchfulness in silence. It mocks the idea of unseen battles, it dismisses the weight of invisible dangers. It scoffs at the call to be awake when there is nothing happening. Yet the very scoffing is itself a victory for the darkness, for it leaves the soul defenseless. A heart that believes there is no danger will never guard itself, and so it falls prey all the more easily. But the one who heeds the summons, who believes that watchfulness is not wasted, finds himself armed even in weakness. He knows that the night hour is not empty but alive with meaning, and he refuses to treat it lightly. And there is a deeper mercy still. Vigilance does not need to be perfect to be effective. The one who watches may feel weary, may stumble, may doubt, yet the very act of lifting the heart, however falteringly, keeps the door barred against the encroaching dark. The Eternal does not despise weakness offered in faith, he honors it. The lamp that flickers, but does not go out still pierces the night. The soldier who leans on his spear, but does not leave his post still guards the gate. The heart that whispers, "I will stay awake, though I am tired," still denies the darkness its claim. For vigilance is not about strength of body, but about faith of spirit, not about brilliance of thought, but about steadfastness of will. 2 in the morning is indeed dangerous, but it is also appointed. It is the hour where the soul must choose whether to drift or to stand, whether to surrender or to guard, whether to believe the shadows or to hold fast to the truth. To remain awake in spirit at such an hour is to stand with those who throughout ages have kept watch, who have refused to let the night define them, who have answered the summons not with despair but with courage. The world may slumber, but the vigilant soul knows its watch has meaning, and though the darkness presses close, though dangers creep, though weariness weighs heavy, the summons of God is clear: do not fear, but be awake, for in your watchfulness lies your safety, and in your vigilance lies your strength.